Amidst the dim pre-dawn haze that drifted over ancient valleys, where temple bells echoed like distant memories and pine forests breathed in slow, steady rhythm, the figure of Japan's early warrior gradually emerged from the quiet fabric of history. The lands were fractured by rival clans whose banners trembled in the mountain winds, and yet, above the clang of steel and the restless murmur of shifting alliances, a deeper force was being born. One that did not belong solely to the battlefield, but to the inner realm of human dignity. In this stillness that balanced violence with contemplation, the foundation of a new chivalrous ideal began to take shape. It was not spoken aloud, it lived in gestures, in the silence between breaths, in the way a warrior knelt before the shrine or tied the cord of his armor with calm precision. This spirit would later be named Bushido, the way of the warrior. A path that merged strength with moral depth, turning every action into a reflection of inner order. As the centuries passed, this quiet current grew into a force that defined not just those who carried the sword, but the very soul of the country. Bushido was never merely a list of rules, nor an instruction given by a single master. It resembled the evolution of European chivalry, but molded by a distinctly Japanese worldview where the sacred and the earthly intertwined. Temples stood beside barracks, and meditation accompanied training, creating a culture where martial skill was incomplete without serenity of heart. Even when the feudal age faded and the great families that once commanded armies dissolved into memory, the code endured like the faint light of a star that had already died, yet continued to shine across the night sky. Its echo lingered in the way people bowed to one another, in the restraint of movements, in the quiet endurance that shaped everyday life. The word Bushido, carrying the weight of centuries, meant more than the literal path of the warrior. It represented a lifelong discipline that shaped conduct in peace and in war. It demanded clarity of intention, purity of soul, and the ability to meet death without resentment or fear. This was the essence that raised the samurai above simple mercenaries and turned their existence into a moral journey. And now, as the story unfolds, the question arises of how this code, born in silence and carried through storms of history, could have taken such deep root that its breath is still felt in the present day, waiting to reveal the origins that shaped its unbreakable core.
Across the fertile plains and mountainous provinces of early medieval Japan, where rice fields shimmered like sheets of beaten silver beneath the sun and fortified estates cast long shadows over the land, the emergence of the samurai class reshaped the entire structure of society. The warrior was not born from the chaos of warfare alone. He arose as an answer to the intricate balance of power between clans, lords, and provincial governors, who needed loyalty not purchased by coin, but forged through duty that bound a man's soul more tightly than chains. In this atmosphere of constant tension, where alliances could shift with the turning of a season and families lived or perished by the strength of their protectors, the samurai gradually became the immovable pillar of the nation. He carried the responsibility not only to fight, but to embody the moral expectations of those he served, standing as a living guarantee of order in a world shaped by uncertainty. Within this emerging hierarchy, the figure of the samurai differed fundamentally from the armored knights of Europe, even though both served feudal lords and upheld systems of hierarchy. In the West, chivalry grew under the influence of Christian theology, which infused the warrior's duties with notions of divine mercy and spiritual redemption. In Japan, however, the ideal arose from a distinct cultural soil, where reverence for ancestors, harmony with nature, and philosophical reflection shaped behavior as deeply as loyalty to one's master. Honor was not granted by the church or sealed by sacred vows. It developed organically through centuries of experience on the battlefield, in the court, and within the private disciplines of daily life. This honor was a constant presence, as subtle as the scent of incense drifting from a temple window, guiding a man's conduct even when no eyes watched him. Bushido did not appear suddenly with a proclamation or a single author who could claim its creation. Instead, it grew gradually, like a tree whose roots expanded across generations, absorbing the lessons of countless warriors who lived and died with the weight of responsibility on their shoulders. Each era added new branches: the discipline of early clans, the refined customs of imperial courts, the hard pragmatism of provincial warlords. Over time, these layers formed a unified code that existed not as a written doctrine but as a living expectation. A samurai learned it through observation, through the stern words of mentors, through the consequences of dishonor witnessed in others. And now, as this code becomes clearer, the story turns toward the spiritual forces that wove its moral fibers, compelling the warrior to seek something deeper than obedience alone, a force that lifted duty into the realm of inner truth.
In the quiet corridors of old monasteries, where incense drifted in slow spirals toward beams darkened by centuries of candle smoke, the spiritual roots of the samurai began to intertwine long before the word Bushido appeared in written form. The warrior lived in a world where belief was not proclaimed loudly, but breathed silently through every gesture. And in this atmosphere, three great teachings gradually merged into a single moral foundation. Buddhism, Shintoism, and Confucianism did not compete for the samurai's soul. They shaped it together, layering discipline upon emotion and clarity upon instinct, until a man learned to face not only enemies on the field, but also the far more treacherous forces hidden within himself. Through this merging of spiritual currents, the warrior discovered a path where fear dissolved into purpose and where honor became the only true compass in the darkness of conflict. Buddhism, which had taken root in Japan centuries earlier, taught the samurai to look upon life and death with a calmness that seemed almost inhuman to outsiders. In the dim light of temple lanterns, monks spoke of impermanence, of the fragile nature of existence, and of the liberation found in detaching oneself from worldly desire. This philosophy granted the warrior the ability to walk toward danger without trembling, to stand beneath volleys of arrows with a steady breath, and to understand that death was merely a passage rather than a catastrophe. The stoic composure for which samurai became famous was not a product of coldness, but of spiritual training that recognized fear as a temporary illusion. And though this strength appeared unyielding, it carried within it a delicate balance that only a disciplined mind could maintain. Shintoism added another dimension to the samurai's worldview. Rooted in the worship of nature and the reverence of ancestral spirits, it infused everyday life with a sense of sacred purity. For the warrior, the emperor was not just a political figure, but the living descendant of the sun goddess, and loyalty to him represented loyalty to the spiritual order of the world itself. The belief that ancestors watched over their descendants created an unbroken chain of responsibility, making every action a reflection not only of one's own soul, but of the family line stretching far into the past. Ritual purity, respect for the land, and devotion to the unseen forces that govern the world nurtured a quiet dignity within the samurai, teaching him that strength without reverence was nothing more than violence. Confucianism completed the structure by giving Bushido its ethical geometry. Through Confucian thought, the samurai learned that duty was not a burden, but a moral privilege, that loyalty to one's lord was a reflection of loyalty to the natural order, and that filial respect was the first discipline a man must master before he could hope to guide others. Honesty, justice, humility, these were not abstract virtues recited in formal lessons, but living expectations that dictated how a warrior spoke, judged, acted, and endured. A man who failed in sincerity or betrayed his word carried dishonor heavier than any wound. Thus, Confucianism shaped Bushido into a system where ethical clarity became the armor of the spirit. As these three traditions converged, they formed a worldview unique in its depth and severity,
a fusion where courage was inseparable from humility, and where discipline protected the soul as surely as armor shielded the body. And now, as these spiritual foundations reveal the inner architecture of the samurai's mind, the narrative approaches the very heart of the code, those virtues that shaped the rhythm of a warrior's life and defined the essence of honor itself.
Across the long centuries of Japan's feudal age, when armored figures moved like shadows beneath torchlit ramparts and the quiet of night was broken only by the distant murmur of wooden gates or the rustling of bamboo groves, the samurai lived according to an inner architecture far stricter than any written law. This architecture was the moral nucleus of Bushido, the collection of virtues that gave form to a warrior's life long before he entered the battlefield. Justice, courage, mercy, courtesy, honesty, honor, and self-control were not decorative ideals recited in ceremonial halls. They were threads woven tightly into the rhythm of existence. Under their weight, a warrior learned to act without hesitation, to speak without deceit, and to restrain his desires with the discipline that seemed, to outsiders, almost ascetic. Nothing in this code existed merely for display. Each virtue was a lived reality that shaped the man from dawn until dusk, from youth until the final hour when the sword might slip from his hand for the last time. Justice formed the spine of Bushido, and it demanded a clarity of judgment that left no space for personal ambition. A warrior learned early that every action he took must reflect the truth as he understood it, a truth unclouded by fear or self-interest. This sense of unwavering rectitude gave rise to courage, an element so central to the samurai that it was less a quality and more a state of being. Courage did not manifest as reckless bravado, but as the ability to face misfortune, blade, or death with a calm resolve born of inner balance. In this harmony between justice and courage grew mercy, the understanding that strength must never turn into cruelty. Even in the ecstasy of battle, a samurai was expected to temper his hand, recognizing the humanity of the defeated and the responsibility that power imposed. Courtesy softened the edges of this severity. It taught the samurai that respect was due not only to lords and elders, but to rivals, servants, and strangers. Through this courtesy, daily interactions became rituals of restraint and dignity, gestures that reflected the order of the world rather than the emotions of the moment. Honesty added another dimension. A samurai's word was considered so binding that a single lie could erase a lifetime of loyalty. Honor, perhaps the brightest flame in the constellation of virtues, demanded that a man guard his name as fiercely as he guarded his life, for the slightest stain upon it could destroy not only him but the lineage he represented. Self-control held all these virtues together. Without it, courage became aggression, justice became rigidity, and honor became vanity. Through discipline of the mind and spirit, the warrior learned to navigate the complexities of duty without allowing emotions to cloud his conscience. This commitment to inner equilibrium made Bushido not just a code of behavior, but a path towards self-mastery, where the ultimate battle was always fought within the heart. And yet, beneath this seemingly unshakable moral structure, the samurai lived with a constant awareness of the fine line between honor and shame. The fear of disgrace, more terrifying than death itself, shadowed every decision, every hesitation, every failure. A single misstep could unravel a lifetime of discipline, forcing a man to choose between living with dishonor or facing the final, irrevocable judgment of the sword. And so the question emerges: how did a warrior prepare himself to bear such a burden, to meet intellectual, emotional, and spiritual expectations as demanding as the edge of his own blade? The answer lies in the next chapter, where the education and discipline of the samurai reveal the depth of a life devoted entirely to the unity of thought and action. In the mansions of powerful clans, where paper walls glowed softly beneath oil lamps and the night air carried the faint rustle of garden bamboo, the education of a young samurai unfolded with a rigor that extended far beyond martial drills. From early childhood, a boy was trained to draw the bow, to balance the spear, to wield the sword with a precision that fused instinct with method. Yet this physical discipline formed only one half of his path. The other half, more subtle, more demanding, lay in the cultivation of the mind. To the samurai, knowledge without integrity was nothing more than vanity, and strength without wisdom was no better than savagery. Thus, in quiet study halls, where the smell of ink mingled with the cold morning air, the warrior immersed himself in the writings of Confucius, Mencius, and the profound insights of Wang Yangming, not to admire abstract thought, but to anchor every decision he made in moral clarity. This intellectual training was never separate from action. The Japanese saying, "To know and to act are one and the same," did not ring as a philosophical curiosity, but as a guiding principle that shaped daily life. A samurai was taught that understanding a concept meant living it, embodying it, carrying it into every gesture and every judgment. Books were copied and recited, but their lessons were tested on the training ground, in the council chamber, and in the quiet moments when a man confronted his own weaknesses. The warrior who failed to translate learning into conduct was regarded with disdain, for a sharp mind unaccompanied by virtue was considered more dangerous than a dull blade. True education required the harmony of intellect, emotion, and conscience, each held in balance like the three legs of a ceremonial stand that could collapse if even one was weakened. In addition to literature and philosophy, the samurai trained in etiquette, poetry, and the delicate art of calligraphy. These practices were not luxuries, they were disciplines of focus, patience, and emotional refinement. A warrior who could write a verse with steady brushstrokes or compose a truthful poem beneath the evening lantern demonstrated command over his inner world, a command essential for maintaining composure in the chaos of battle. Through such refined pursuits, he learned the importance of restraint, the value of silence, and the serenity that lay at the core of strength. Yet discipline extended far beyond intellectual cultivation and artistic practice. Every morning, long before the first hint of sunrise touched the edges of the eastern sky, the samurai rose to prepare his spirit. Through meditation, he quieted the restless tide of thought. Through ritual, he honored the ancestors. And through physical repetition, he strengthened the body until its movements became as fluid as water, shaping the stones of a stream. To fail in discipline was to betray not only oneself, but the generations who had carried the same responsibilities. And thus, every day was a renewal of a vow taken silently but deeply. Through this union of knowledge, discipline, and inner refinement, the samurai became a being shaped equally by strength and wisdom. And now, as the path approaches its final chapter, the question emerges of how this ancient code survived the collapse of the world that created it, how Bushido continued to live, shaping a nation long after the armor was hung in shrines and the swords were left to sleep in their lacquered sheaths. Long after the echoes of battle faded from the valleys of Japan, and long after the final samurai sheath was closed around a sword destined never again to be raised in war, the spirit of Bushido continued to drift through the country like a quiet wind no generation could forget. The Meiji Restoration dissolved the class that had embodied this ancient code for centuries, transforming warriors into civil servants, teachers, farmers, merchants, and administrators. Yet despite the disappearance of their armor, something older and more resilient endured. It lived not in the swords locked behind glass, nor in the formal documents that attempted to describe the code after the fact, but in the daily rhythms of the people. Honor, restraint, dignity, these elements became woven into the culture so deeply that even those who no longer carried blades inherited the moral imprint left behind by their ancestors. In the new modern Japan, where steam engines rattled along tracks that cut through fields once patrolled by mounted retainers, and where Western ideas collided with centuries-old traditions, Bushido adapted with a surprising grace. It shaped relationships between teacher and student, employer and worker, parent and child. The emphasis on loyalty, humility, and duty echoed quietly across both professional and private life, creating patterns of behavior that outsiders often misunderstood as mere politeness. Yet beneath the calm exterior lay a philosophy forged by warriors who understood that true strength came from controlling one's emotions rather than surrendering to them, from honoring commitments even when no reward awaited, and from meeting hardship with silent determination. In these values, the ancient spirit continued to live even as swords rusted in attics and the world moved toward a different kind of conflict. Although history transformed the landscape of the nation, the essence of Bushido remained a compass for countless individuals, seeking meaning beyond material success or fleeting achievement. It whispered through the bowed heads of students reciting morning greetings, through the precision of craftsmen shaping wood or metal, through the endurance of workers who completed tasks not for show, but because they understood that integrity was a reward in itself. The warrior had vanished, but the warrior's mindset persisted. It became a shared memory, an invisible thread linking generations across eras of peace and turmoil, guiding the nation through moments of vulnerability with the same quiet resolve that once led a samurai across the threshold of life and death. In the present day, this legacy is not restricted to museums or historical reenactments. It manifests in a worldview that values perseverance, sincerity, and responsibility. The modern individual may never unsheathe the blade, yet he carries within him the lingering echo of an ancient path, a path that taught him to listen to the voice of conscience even when it trembles, to face uncertainty without surrendering dignity, and to understand that honor is not found in applause, but in the silent space where intention and action meet. Bushido survives not as a relic, but as a living philosophy, one that continues to shape the way people walk, bow, speak, and endure. And as this journey along the warrior's road draws to its close, a final truth emerges quietly from the shadows of history. The sword was never the essence of the samurai. It was only a symbol, a vessel through which his inner clarity gained form. What defined him, what allowed his spirit to transcend centuries, was the fierce commitment to truth within himself. And thus the path of the warrior remains eternal, carried forward by those who choose not to live for fear or glory, but for the unwavering light of honor that still burns, however softly, in the depths of the human heart.